Hello, digital simulations, unsuspecting loved ones, and the odd polar bear. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Black Mirror episode Striking Vipers. I am Bill Sylvia, better known on YouTube as the Man in Black, and I'm going to be diving into the social and physical science of the ideas presented in this story. What is it that this means for the future of my channel? Probably not very much, as this is an assignment for class. However, as I'm going through some major lifestyle changes in the next 6 months, including starting a doctoral program where I will hopefully no longer need to work off campus, it's possible that I will continue to produce videos like this one. Striking Vipers is the first episode of the 5th season of Black Mirror. It focuses on the relationship between two men and its unexpectedly sexual evolution upon moving to a digital setting. In addition to exploring such issues as virtual infidelity, Striking Vipers showcases how two friends with no prior romantic interest develop a passionate physical and possibly romantic affair.
I love you.
Much like other Black Mirror episodes such as USS Callister and Black Museum do, Striking Vipers relies heavily on the premise introduced in Season 3's episode San Junipero. In San Junipero, patients who are close to death are permitted to spend time inhabiting virtual avatars of their younger or idealized selves. In San Junipero, Kelly, a septuagenarian widow, and Yorkie, a woman who has spent most of her life in a coma, begin first a sexual, then a romantic relationship. San Junipero is a party town, and one-night stands are common. While some believe that senior citizens have no interest in sex, this is an outdated stereotype that can cause real harm in training healthcare practitioners, as described in a 2011 article by Abby Taylor and Margot Gosney. In 2017, Randy Lilliston of the American Association of Retired Persons analyzed publicly available Center for Disease Control reports and found that sexually transmitted diseases among older adults were on the rise, with over 80,000 cases of chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis reported in people over 45 in a one-year period. Despite the stereotypes demonstrably not being categorically true, Taylor and Gosney also reported decreased sexual interest in senior citizens compared to their younger counterparts. One of many factors in this decreased interest, particularly among postmenopausal cisgender women, is hormones. If digital bodies are close enough to real ones to avoid disassociation and dysphoria, simulated hormones are part of the digital avatar experience. Hormones and menopause are linked to a variety of psychological effects, including mood, mate-attracting behavior, and gender affirmation, as described by Todd Niven of WebMD. They are also linked to levels of sexual interest and responsiveness, according to a 2015 article by Thornton, Shervanack, and Neil Perry. Simply put, the sexual behavior in San Junipero is either well above the norm or indicative of young adult hormones. Why am I spending so much time discussing the hormones of septuagenarian women to discuss an episode about men in their 30s? Because the same body avatar incongruence appears. In San Junipero, it's the difference between an older, failing body and a younger, healthy avatar. In Striking Vipers, it's the difference between an average to couch potato masculine body and an extremely fit masculine or feminine body. While some of the mechanisms at play are different, the same overall concept prevails. Danny and Carl's bodies are radically different from Lance's and Roxette's. Let's actually put aside the hormonal issues involved for the time being. While they're relevant, there are simpler issues at work here as well. It would be ridiculous of me to attempt to say that Anthony Mackie, who plays Danny, is out of shape. He's an Avenger, after all. Still, Striking Vipers appears to make it clear that Danny and Carl are regular people. They may not be slouches, but they're not professional athletes either. Let's compare that to Lance and Roxette. Both of these bodies, characters might be too generous a term for these empty vessels, are player characters from a fighting video game. They are at or above peak levels of human fitness, not entirely unlike Falcon and his friends. According to Health and Human Services, Physical activity helps condition your heart and lungs, build endurance, and increase energy and self-esteem. Suddenly being in a new body with all of these benefits would be more than enough to cause the sudden surge of sexual energy we see between Danny Lance and Carl Roxette. Focusing more specifically on sexual benefits, a 2018 survey of 148 participants by Leah Giannine found that physical fitness, self-concept, and sexual behavior and experience were all positively related. Conversely, physical inactivity and poor fitness are linked to poor sexual function. But of course, the main event of Striking Vipers is not the fact that we're dealing with two average guys in the bodies of athletes. No, this is the episode where issues of gender and sexuality not only cannot be ignored, but they are usually the first things people think about when they think about the episode.
So, guess that's us gay now.
Don't feel like a gay thing.
Like this. It's the only way. You gotta know.
Researching this episode, I mostly found takes about sexual orientation. Generally, the focus was on whether the scenes you just saw were heteronormative or even homophobic, and what relationship the episode has with bi erasure. Yet, I don't think that's the real story here. Before you can even talk about what relationship this episode has with sexual orientation, you need to look at what relationship the episode has with gender.
It's different. Like, the physical feeling of it is more sort of satisfying.
It's easy to look at this episode as the relationship between two men. Danny and Carl as men is the default normative presentation shown to us in the beginning of the episode. And yet, while Danny's gender presentation never really falters, Carl's identity seems to waver. This questioning of Carl Roxette's identity seems to be the major theme of this episode. Sure, it makes statements about online relationships and fidelity, but none of them is as clearly articulated as Carl Roxette's description of how it feels to be in this new body. Striking Viper's story isn't about what it feels like for two men to fall in love, and it is my personal opinion that criticisms of the episode challenging it on that basis are missing the point. Striking Vipers is a story about gender identity, transition, and the relationship between a woman-attracted man and a person who is experiencing fluidity between male and female identities. Modern technology doesn't allow experimenting people to just change their bodies for a few hours, but elements of this can be seen in various forms of media. While sex and gender are, as in Striking Vipers, commonly associated with body elements, most of which are common but not universal among cisgender people, gender is primarily demonstrated through social and cultural means. The following quote from Judith Butler's 1990 book Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity helps to illustrate this. The effect of gender is produced through the stylization of the body and, hence, must be understood as the mundane way in which bodily gestures, movements, and styles of various kinds constitute the illusion of an abiding gendered self. This formulation moves the conception of gender off the ground of a substantial model of identity to one that requires a conception of gender as a constituted social temporality. In short, gender is carried in communication patterns, cultural ideals about what most women or most men are likely to do, and visual presentation. In general, no single aspect of this presentation will make or break the impression on its own. The character of man, woman, or neither is made up of dozens, hundreds, even thousands of individual acts that add to the overall piece of work. All of this leads to the fact that the internet is a perfect place to experiment with your gender presentation. To borrow phrasing from sociologist Erving Goffman, the internet is a place where you have a great degree of control in determining the separation of the front, the presentation that people see, and the backstage, your unprocessed personal life. It often requires a conscious decision to move anything from the backstage of your IRL life to the front of your online persona. In her TED Talk, Ulrike Schutz discussed how people experiment with identity in social media.
This should be a life that is different from your real life. It should be separate from your real life. And what you should be doing is trying to explore what you would be like, who you would be, if only you could get rid of this body. If only you could get rid of the social relationships that you have in real life. Right? And so exploring this, exploring who you could be, who you are, right? Your inner self, the search for the inner self, that's the kind of identity work associated with these.
Even small changes to your online persona can create drastic differences in how you experience the social world.
As an adult, I don't create a different persona or anything, but I don't go out of the way to make the point that I'm the age that I am. People just treat you differently if they think you're 25 than they think you're 14. I don't want to make people think I'm an adult, but I didn't want people to judge what I was saying because of my age. When I'm posting online and stuff, I kind of choose my words very carefully to make sure it doesn't sound like something a 14-year-old would say. I like being treated as an intelligent, rational, thinking human being.
Given the experimental nature of online personas, it's only natural that people use online identity as a way to embody parts of themselves that they could not display in public. For many transgender, non-binary, and questioning people, it's still unsafe to live that reality in person. Changing your gender presentation and gauging its effects can be relatively simple. In 2017, a man named Martin Schneider accidentally used his colleague Nicole Hallberg's email signature in their shared account and received unexpectedly rude responses from customers, prompting the two to switch email signatures for 2 weeks. Customers were more argumentative and less trusting of advice if they believed they were communicating with Hallberg compared to Schneider. The most accepted interpretation of this response is that this simple change convinced clients that they were dealing with a woman instead of a man, or vice versa. This interpretation suggests that the behavioral changes were based on gender bias, and that there was nothing else about the email signatures or their interpretation of the interactions to account for the change. Even if we assume there is something else about Hallberg's signature that said she was a woman rather than simply having a common woman's name instead of a common man's name, I would say this account still serves our purposes in demonstrating that it did not take much to activate a different gender attribution in text-based communication. Okay, that was text, but how about more visual media? In a 2018 essay in Vice magazine, Diana Tourget discussed just this. Growing up, I could only see my reflection in black mirrors. Tourget talks about gender dysphoria and the experience of not identifying with the person, the one others had labeled and shaped as a boy, she would see in a normal mirror. By contrast, when she would play a video game, controlling these characters began to feel more authentic than controlling myself. She goes on to say that, because I could choose the names, appearances, and genders of the avatars I embodied online, they became an extension of me. After all, they reflected more of myself than any mirror ever could. I was growing up in a male body, and, while I felt completely in charge online, I had little control over my offline life. In the case of Diana Tourget, the experience of experimenting with online avatars gave her the opportunity to present herself as a woman. In doing so, it gave her the chance to realize that she identified with the woman on screen. These examples suggest that experimenting with your presentation through the internet and video games can be therapeutic for people who do not feel comfortable with how they present in their daily life. Because you are unlikely to interact with anybody who can connect the profile to your in-person identity, the risk of this experimentation is relatively low. However, the possible benefits can be pretty significant.
being in a woman's body, well,
Crazy. It's crazy.
Not damn thing.
This final topic is one many cisgender people might not be familiar with, and even trans people have vastly different experiences with.
Talking about like my sexuality and how it's changed over the years, because like, oh my god, it is a motherfucking roller coaster.
Today I'm going to be talking about something that's quite surprising. Well, I guess just odd. Not many people have probably heard of this before. Let's get into the story. The story is, basically, I used to only like boys, and now I like boys and girls.
While this is not true of all people who undergo gender transition or hormone replacement therapy, some transitioning transgender people experience a change in their sexual orientation. Clinical psychologist Dr. Z gives one theory that might explain this phenomenon.
Same, for others it did not. And this leads me to my first hypothesis. This hypothesis, in my view, explains how sexual orientation can shift or change for those individuals who were either not aware of their gender identity until later in life, or were aware early on but whose gender identity was repressed. In other words, this group of people had a long period of time where they were not able to be either in touch with their identity or express it in any way. And I call this hypothesis dormancy of the self. And I choose the word dormant, meaning being in a state of inactivity or in a state of sleep, because as you know, your gender identity is always there. But for most, it is in a state of dormancy, meaning you're not fully in touch with that part of yourself. And that's one of the reasons why many people become aware of their gender identity later in life. So let's look at this hypothesis. Well, psychologically speaking, if your true sense of who you are is inactive or asleep, for better lack of words, then it also means that your sexuality in relation to that part is also asleep as well. Let me give you an example. If I am assigned female at birth, but my gender identity is actually male, and I'm not aware of it, say maybe due to repression or upbringing, then what happens is this. I'm socialized by my family as a female, and I'm taught to interact with others as a female. As a result, my psyche relates to the gender, even through my gender, is not really my true self. Let's call it false self. Because my true self, the male self, is dormant. So as a result, I will orient my sexuality from that gender. As a woman, I may find myself sexually attracted to women or men, or I may feel that my sexuality is pansexual. But wouldn't that stem from my false self? In other words, if it's not my true gender, right? How can my sexuality based on that be also true?
There is some evidence for this theory. For example, many gay stereotypes in the West, too many to go into here, are simply linked to the idea of a man who acts like a woman. A trans woman with a limited identity framework might believe that her inclinations are those of a gay man and adopt behaviors and identities to match pre-transition. However, attraction is too tied into physiology for me to believe that it is the only reason. Very little is actually confirmed about why this happens. This may be because transgender people were not considered an important population to study until recently, because it's a very difficult to research topic, or for other or a combination of reasons. A 2014 study by Auer, Fuss, Sohn, Stalya, and Sievers tried to examine this phenomenon. After questioning 115 clients that they described as transsexual, they found that approximately 1/3 of women and between 1/5 and 1/4 of men reported some change in their sexual orientation. These changes did not appear to be universally linked to any particular stage of the transition process, and occurred more often in those initially attracted to the gender they would transition to. Striking Vipers gives a peek into a world that many cisgender people do not see. Carl Roxette experiments with gender identity in a way that causes him to alternate between gynophilia and androphilia. He could easily be labeled as gender fluid based only on what we see, something that this video would have focused more on if I was able to find more research to reference, but is definitely in the queer/questioning spectrum.
Hey Bill, are you going to discuss this episode featuring two black men in the bodies of a white and an East Asian person?
And that's me out of time. Thank you, everyone.